We are now just hearing that this jury has found El Chapo guilty on all 10 federal counts. That includes 7 drug trafficking charges. That includes leading and engaging in a criminal enterprise, a firearms charge, as well as money laundering. El Chapo will be spending the rest of his life in prison.
Get him out! Get him out!
I guarantee you, he wishes now a rival put a bullet in his head when he was in Mexico about what he's going to go through.
A new study shows Americans are more likely to die from an opioid overdose than a car accident.
Where we saw it was ground zero in Chicago. The prescription drug issue was becoming more and more of a problem. I'll never forget it. It was on the west side of Chicago, controlled by a gang, and what they would do is they would social media, hey, I'm going to be on the corner of Stony Island and 33rd at 7 a.m. Okay, so we set up on that, and lo and behold, we had housewives from the affluent suburbs show up in Range Rovers. We had an airline pilot, and they all stood in line with their money. There's probably 100 of them, and they served these people, you know, their bags of heroin for the day in like 10 minutes, and then they all dispersed. I finally told the guys, you got to stop this. I can't take it. One, she had a year-old baby in her car seat. This is a terrible part of the city. It's where the shootings and everything happens. And here she is at 7 a.m. Those are the people that found themselves in the grips of addiction from prescription drugs. The doctor wouldn't prescribe, pharmacists wouldn't get them, they're too expensive. You can't steal them from somebody's medicine cabinet anymore. So what do? You go, you get heroin. Chapo figured that out before anybody.
There's a war on drugs, and drugs is winning.
And if they're arrested, they're back out on the street before the paperwork's even finished.
Basically, we're putting more manpower, of course, on the streets, and with the increasing of amount of narcotics coming into this country, you're going to see more and more violence.
It was 1981. I was in charge of the Mexican methamphetamine section, and Chapo was just emerging at that time. We didn't know a lot about him, and you have to understand, in those early days, in the mid-'80s and early '90s, the Mexican cartel structure as we know it today didn't exist. The Colombians began moving towards Mexico to get into the United States. So he was one of the early guys that cut a deal with the Colombians. And this is where Chapo really stood up and began to see his future. Initially, the Colombians would go to the Mexican organizations and say, we want you to move 500 kilos of cocaine through Mexico and deliver it to our surrogates in LA. And to do that, we'll give you $2,000 per kilo you move. Chapo said, no, we'll do it. And I'll do it within 48 hours. But if I move 500 kilos, you give me 100 kilos. So now they had their own source of cocaine. And that's when the ballgame changed. And this is where Chapo really emerged as a hell of a CEO. He began to corner the market on logistics, moving product across the border. He's the guy that really started using tunnels. And that really was something way ahead of what the United States was ready for.
We have a shaft that goes down about, we're estimating 60 to 70 feet at about a 45-degree angle down into Mexico, and there's a rail system for a cart to transport the drugs from Mexico into the United States.
I think it's one of the things that scared me as a young guy. He clearly, to me, was somebody that was going to emerge as a leader, and I knew what he was capable then, and I was concerned if we didn't do something about him, what he was capable of becoming. And indeed, that's what happened.
In Chicago alone, over 90% of the marijuana, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and other synthetic drugs that are being sold on the streets while we're standing here have come from the Sinaloa cartel.
Sinaloa dominated the Chicago market. They flooded it with heroin. From there, he could move throughout the country. Chapo was a brilliant guy to use the street gangs to really do his work. They were really subcontractors, unwitting. They didn't know who they worked for. They didn't care. His bad guys hide and work amongst, hundreds and thousands of really hard-working Mexican Americans, so they could be a little invisible.
There's a guy laying on the middle of the street. Looks like he's shot.
He had a plan, and he knew what he had to do to stay on top, and he knew the threat of violence was really important. It was part of the business plan. With Chapo, I really believe it was never about the money, it was about the power. Chapo started the fight. He was trying to take over their territory. And then the Arellano Felix brothers, they retaliated. And then they found out that Chapo was going to go to the Guadalajara airport. He was going to go try to convene what we know in the United States as the commission, the meeting of organized crime or cartel heads, because he was going to try to broker a deal. So the Felix brothers sent their crew to kill him, and those morons picked the wrong car. And they put 64 rounds into the car, and unfortunately, it was the Cardinal, who was just a hero in Mexico. And that really started Chapo's downfall. It was at that point the U.S. got involved, and we tracked him down, and he was arrested in Guatemala. He goes to jail, and he continues to run his business. He was in control of everything. And actually at that time, it was probably a good thing for him to be in jail. It was much safer because his rivals couldn't get to him. But what happened was the U.S. was now beginning to talk about extradition. And I think that's why he decided to sneak out the door in a laundry cart his first escape. And then he really was on the run for almost 15 years. I was a special agent in charge of the DEA El Paso Field Division. When they sent me down there, it was a battlefield. Chapo was battling with the remnants of the Gulf Cartel and the Juarez Cartel. And there were literally thousands of people killed there a month. It was terrible. In fact, a lot of people said at that point it was more dangerous than Baghdad or Kabul. So I get down there, and I'm all ready to, change the world. And so I give an interview to the newspaper. Now, little did I know that the sister newspaper was located in Juarez. Chapo had a piece of or had some influence in. So I tell the newspaper, I'm after Chapo, we're going to disrupt it, we're going to make it hard for him. This is war. Well, he heard it, and he read it. And a couple days later, the Mexicans notified us through some channels that they had picked up information and he'd put a bounty on my head, wanted my head cut off. So right then and there, it was personal for me. It was only $100 grand too, which really pissed me off. I was like, yeah, forget it. I'm not going to worry about this. Now I know I'm under his skin, which is what I want to do. So now we had a plan. We were doing things, and I was going home late one night. We lived in Las Cruces, which is about 40 miles up. You go up Interstate 10. There's nothing there but slaughter houses on both sides. It smells like death. So I was driving home, and I was so stupid. I drove the same way home every night. I was getting on the interstate, and there were two cars parked, driver to driver. They were in a fast food restaurant that had been closed, and kind of on the side. And as I pulled up, I saw their headlights coming up, and then all of a sudden, I pull on the interstate, and they come right on me. And I'm thinking to myself, this doesn't look right. So I keep driving. I had a brand new car. At first, I thought, they're going to try to carjack me, because that's another lucrative crime on the border. So we're down the road, and one guy's on my bumper, and then the other guy pulls up in front and slows down. It looks to me like a kidnapping type deal, and no license plates on him. So I called an agent that lived by me that worked for me, and I said, hey, look, you need to get to my house. I don't want my wife to know, but I don't know what these guys are doing. And then my goal was just to drive to the sheriff's department But as I got closer, I decided to get off the road and just run. And I didn't want to take him by my house or where my kid went to school. I didn't want to give him any clues. And so we go back and forth through this neighborhood, very nice neighborhood, and I'm going 80 miles an hour, and they're on me. And I think now we've got a problem. Part of the problem was I wasn't sure where the sheriff's department was. And the agents had contacted the police, but they were going southbound, and I was going northbound because they didn't know where I was. So I see this elementary school, and I said, I'm just going to pull in the back here and see what happens. I just gotten a new gun. I think it had 9 rounds in it, and I had 1 spare magazine. And the car didn't have a DEA radio or lights on it. Otherwise, I would have done that. So I didn't have anything to, I figured, here we go. So I get out of the car. I said, if you're going to go, let's go. One guy pulls in. The other guy drives by. The guy that pulls in turns his lights off. And I'm thinking, okay, now, my thought was I was just going to get up and bum rush him. Figuring let's do something, maybe I scare him. And then all of a sudden, his engine starts. And the other guy, it was in a blue Ford Explorer, he pulls up, he turns his lights on, and they take off. So I don't know what happened there. This may have been an attempt to scare the crap out of me, which it did, by the way. Or maybe they just thought, look, this guy's going to fight back. I don't know. The Chicago Crime Commission has been around since 1930. And so they have an awards dinner every year they sponsor, and I was asked to give the keynote speech. And so I spoke at length about Chapo, and I said that the last time the Crime Commission named public enemy #1, it was Al Capone. And I think it's time we name Chapo Guzman. And when you put a face on somebody, when you say, you know a 16-year-old that overdosed on heroin that goes to your kid's school? Well, here's the guy that produced the heroin. It helps the public understand what we're up against. So a couple weeks after that, the executive vice president of the Crime Commission said, we're taking you up on that. We're going to have a press conference.
Chapo Guzman, in my opinion, is the most dangerous criminal in the world, second to none as far as I see it. If there's any bad guys out there that watch anything that you guys put out, we're coming. We're not backing down. The good guys are not rolling over.
It ticked off a lot of legitimate Mexican business people who felt they were embarrassed. And they actually put pressure through their channels on the Mexican government to form a unit to go get Chapo. And that's exactly what happened. I was in D.C. I'd come in from the field for a meeting, and there had been reports that he'd been captured by the Guatemalans long before that. And there was another story that he had died in a shootout, and all of that was fictitious. So we demanded a photo of him. And a couple of days later, we got the photo, and we knew that he was actually locked up because it was up to him when he decided he wanted to leave.
En el Centro Federal de Readaptación Social número 1, Altiplano, se registró la fuga de Joaquín Guzmán Loera.
I was chief operations at the time, and we began hearing intelligence and chatter that he was tunneling out. Now you got to understand, a guy like that with a history of tunnels, they left him in the same cell on the ground floor for over a year. So I think I went down, I want to say I went down in March and met with the head of the federal police and said, hey, look, dummy, here's what we know. We want you to do something about it. And he blew it off. And then Chapo escapes down the tunnel about 2 months later on a motorcycle. And of course, the head of the federal police was fired shortly after that. But it just showed you what we were dealing with.
The manhunt is still on throughout Mexico, which is where just about everyone investigating this case believes Joaquin El Chapo Guzman remains. That's where his contacts are, that's where his drug cartel operates, and it's where people have been paid handsomely to help him evade authorities and now escape prison with at least an 18-minute head start.
That was the worst day of my life on the job. I was getting ready to retire right before that, and I just told my wife I got to stay till we get this guy hooked up. One of the reasons we were able to to nail Chapo both times and get him extradited is because we finally found a crew of guys in Mexico we could work with, and those are the Marines. Before that, you couldn't work with anyone. We put together a really talented team of in-country people and our guys here in the States. And what we did this time was, we learned from the first time, we didn't really concentrate so much on him. We concentrated on all the people around him. His cooks, his girlfriends, his drivers, his doctor, all of that, because they were pretty free with their communications, where he was in the dark at that point. And that turned out to be a great strategy, because from that, we built life patterns of where we thought he was and what he was going to do on a daily basis. And that really changed the game for us. We had, for months, used all this technology and people on the ground, both DEA, FBI, U.S. Marshals, some of the intelligence people, working with the Mexican Marines, because what I envisioned and what I was pushing them to do was a sustained fight. We had been planning this operation. They had moved assets, Mexican Marines, basically into a hostile territory, because Chapo was in this compound, at least we believed he was. He controlled the surrounding areas. He had a police force the size of a major city. We had set them up with ATVs and everything. We didn't want to use helicopters because they hear them coming. They're getting ready to go, and lo and behold, the Mexicans call it off.
Sean Penn went on assignment for Rolling Stone into the mountains of Mexico and interviewed one of the most wanted men in the world. Guzman even reached out to a Mexican actress who plays a drug lord on television. That actress got in touch with Sean Penn. Together, they traveled into a remote region of Mexico to interview the man known as El Chapo. It's worth noting that Rolling Stone violated common journalistic procedures by showing the article to El Chapo before publication. They say, however, that the drug lord made no editorial changes.
When I found out why they called it off, it was unbelievable. The people that Sean Penn put at risk, just those 2 days, was crazy. So they did all their interviews. I'm assuming they made money off it, right? And Chapo's in the wind again.
The one raid where they were unsuccessful in capturing El Chapo, there were casualties. People died. So does that weigh on you? Does that bother you?
Every single day, yes. They said that they didn't want to go in because we were there, Sean and the producers and I, so they didn't want to get there because we were there. So that still makes me feel guilty in some way. I don't even know how to explain how wrong it went. It was not supposed to go this way. I was just trying to do a movie.
So when the Mexican Marines finally decide to go, at that point they do take helicopters. And of course the helicopters are heard. Chapo had grabbed a young girl and was running off the compound on his way to get on an ATV to leave the area. And he was holding the young girl as a shield. And the Marines who had him, they had to call it off. And then, of course, all of the telecommunication things we were looking at went dark. So we essentially had to start over. That's the story, although the next time we did it, we were far better at it. So we put the team back together. We went right back to what worked the first time. Chapo's a ladies' man, right? He's a little older, and things don't work the same as they used to work. So he was going to get a penis implant. So what we figured we would do is try to figure out which physician was going to do it and get on that physician. And at some point, if this was true, that the doctor would take his little black bag and they would go meet Chapo, and lo and behold, we get him. So those are the type of things that we were looking to do. And one thing Chapo didn't really realize is he had some real morons working for him. And so they'll make mistakes. But we were in a position now to capitalize on that. And then there was some information developed that he was going to go to this area, Las Mochis, which is a populated, really not a bad place. So we decided, well, how the hell are we going to find him? And we sat down and we said, look, what's his escape mode? You know, he's used the bathtub you know, the bathtub comes up, he goes down into the sewer. So we looked for developments that had sewer connections, and we concentrated on those. And this is where the Marines really did great work. They stayed out there. They didn't give up. I think they stayed there almost 60 days. And then we saw a particular condo being remodeled, the front door being fortified. We're onto something here. And they stayed with it, and they stayed with it, and I'll never forget the night I got the call. They think they have him. They'd say, we have eyes on him. I said, really? He shows up to this place they're working on. He's in a van with 2 bodyguards, which is really unusual. But I think he did it on purpose. He didn't want a crew of Suburbans coming up. So then they sat on the place, and lo and behold, that evening, he and 2 other guys go out, and I'm not making this up, they go out to get tacos. And on the way back, they stop and pick up some porn movies. And of course, when they told me that, I said, we got him. Marines took 4 or 5 hours to get ready to go. And they went in, and there was a tremendous firefight. I think we killed 6 of those guys. We had 1 good guy, a Marine, got shot in the arm. He lived. And Chapo beats us out the sewer with his security chief. Now, the one thing Chapo wasn't counting on was it had rained pretty hard 2 or 3 days before that. And this is a sewer. So they had to wade through neck-high sewage, which I love. And they finally come to a street, and they pop up, and they push the sewer up, and then they carjack a car. And the car breaks down. And by then, the Marines were overhead in a helicopter, and they saw them, and local police pulled up, and that was it. It was over. Now, I was sitting on the stage in Quantico, and then somebody comes and pulls me off the stage, and they say, we got him. And I say, before I tell him, and he tells the Attorney General, I got to see a picture of him. 2 minutes later, over the old phone, there he is in the old wife-beater shirt that he wore through the sewer. I told the boss, we got him. And it was, that was a good day. I knew that day, and my wife knew that day, that was it, I was done. I was going to retire. I did what I could do. I had the best career I think anybody could ever have.